Hi, I'm Lucas Flatter. I went to RIT for game development in 2014. I've run 5 marathons. Five. Went to University of Mary Washington in Fredericksburg, Virginia, for my MBA, and I have made this comic book that you can pre-order, and I'm going to teach you guys how to make one of these booklets on a MacBook. How to make a booklet on the Mac. I'm using a program called Create Booklet 2. When you first open it up, you're going to see these presets here. If you select Create Basic Booklet, go ahead and move on to Advanced Settings. If you open up your booklet in this program, the first thing you're going to see, if you go to Preview, you can scroll through your booklet. If this makes sense to you and this is how you ultimately want the booklet to print, then that's pretty much the stage we're starting at. So you might need to do some adjustment to your PDF potentially. There's other settings that I'm not going to get into that can help you set up the PDF if it's not already, in a friendly format. The format that I was using, it has the pages next to each other like this on a single page, but I'm sure that if you have a PDF that goes page by page, it'll also function. For my booklet, I'm using a tabloid page size, so you need to go into page setup and then select the paper size of whatever you're printing on. So I select 11 by 17, which is the tabloid size, and then just make sure it's showing up here. For me, I'm not scaling the pages at all. That's because I'm printing a smaller document than the actual paper size. But potentially you could say, I want the whole thing to fit on the page all the way to the edge. So if you change that, let me see. This program's a little slow sometimes. Alright, it looks like the computer got out of the freeze mode. So I hit fit, and now if you look at the preview, you'll see the comic goes all the way to the edge. The reason I don't do that is because my printer will add a slight gap to the edges on certain paper types, certain configurations. There's some ways around it, I think, where you can kind of make it print all the way to the edge, but I don't really want to mess around with that. Potentially, if I go back to scale, which is how I want it, you can also say align to the bottom. So if my printer did want to be easy to work with and friendly and actually print to that bottom correctly, or if your document already had the gap that the printer is expecting, but neither is the case for mine. So I just, keep it in the middle. The next setting I actually do get into is creep compensation. So just to quickly illustrate that, I'm just going to open this help page. Right, so pretty much what creep compensation would do is it adjusts the inner pages content. It makes it narrower so that when the pages get pushed out, they'll naturally get pushed out because the outer pages are containing the inner pages. So the more pages you have and the thicker your paper is, the more creep there's going to be. And this setting in this booklet maker tool will actually adjust the images so that when you cut, you're not cutting into the images more on the middle pages than the outside pages. So it's pretty much something that you're going to want to turn on if you're turning this into an actual booklet. So it's based on your paper's grams per meter squared, and you'll probably see that as GSM if you're buying paper, or by pounds. If you have the pounds and not GSM, just Google, how many GSM is 40-pound paper, for example. My paper is 35-pound, and it's just about 120 GSM. It doesn't need to be exact. If you really want to be exact, you can specify the millimeters, and there's calculations to do that, but I'm not going to get into that. You can also add staple markings, so I will show that real quick. So I usually put 2 staples in, so it looks like, it's doing the little X marks where they want us to staple, but I wouldn't really do that. I mean, it's just unnecessary. Once you get a measurement of where you want to put your staples, you don't really need markings. And then the final setting that I actually do change is the crop box. So without the crop box, you can't see any of the margins where you might want to cut. I mean, obviously for this cover, I would just cut on the blue line, but it's just easier to be able to line it up that way, and then I know exactly how far I need to go and everything. I'll put that on only the first page. You can get it to print on every page, but I just noticed that if you have any mistakes in your booklet, and maybe like this page is slightly wider for some strange reason, and it could be that you folded it incorrectly or something, then you're gonna basically put a glaring like signpost that, oh, I made a mistake on this page, because you can see the dotted line. So this is, let's see, on only first page. Yeah, so this is what it would look like if I didn't say that, only on first page. And that's pretty much it. Now, when you actually decide to print, this is kind of cutting off, but it says my printer name, and then it says manual duplex. And then it goes into a little bit of information on manual duplex printing. If you haven't set this up on your printer, you would go into setup, and then you would print this test pattern. And then depending on how the pattern ends up going through your printer, this application will either flip the pages if it needs to, or like alternate flipping pages, all sorts of different settings. Mine, let me see if I can open those settings real quick. Create booklet, settings. If you look at my manual duplex, it's not actually doing any of those things, but it has the potential to flip which page is printed on, like which side is printed on, whether the back pages need to be rotated 90 degrees, and whether they need to be, reversed order. And that will depend partly on what your printer expects to happen, and then also if you just prefer to rotate it a particular way, some way that you're going to remember to do every time, this app will actually account for that. So you'll never have, incorrectly oriented pages when you're putting them through the second pass. And I'll get into that now. So let's go to print. Like I said, it goes into what manual duplex is, which is just duplex means double-sided, and manual meaning that you're going to flip them by yourself because the printer is not going to. Just think of odd and even in this case as front and back. So we're saying print odd pages, but the way that the booklet is set up, it's going to be all the front pages first. So if you're on the newer Mac OS, you'll see this exact same printer dialog. It doesn't matter what kind of printer you have. You'll see it's showing 11 pages. This is just the front, so I have the cover, I have a blank sheet, and then the rest of the inside pages. But in my case, I'm going to uncheck page 10, which is the blank page, because there's really no point for me to just run an empty sheet. And then also, for some reason, I have an Epson printer. For some reason, it gets kind of confused should I print 2 blank pages or 3 blank pages? And it's just kind of random, so I don't even mess around with doing the blank pages anymore. And I'll explain how I kind of account for that. So after I uncheck that, you'll see copies. Under copies, it says selection, pages 1 through 9, and then page 11. That's just signifying that it's skipping page 10. So that's what I intended for. On my printer, I need to select double-sided on short edge, and it might vary depending on your printer, but mine would print flipped every other page, so it would say like right side up, flipped, right side up, flipped. I don't know why. Then if you go to your media, depending on your printer, you might need to specify where the paper is coming from. For some reason, mine never really is able to detect, so I always have to specify. And then media type's actually important because it'll determine, how saturated your colors are and how the printer is going to mix the ink and everything to create the colors that you're trying to, based on these files. But you can also select high gloss, matte, semi-gloss, plaid paper. I know that says plain paper, but it'd be funny if it said plaid paper, coated paper, just all sorts of different kinds. For the most part, if you're printing something like this, it's either going to be like a photo matte or a photo gloss or something. And then quality, I would specify normal. If you select best, at least for my printer, it's going to take significantly longer, like minutes rather than, 30 seconds or so. And also it's going to use a lot more ink. And it's really for no reason. If you're going to print maybe a couple photos or a poster, or you're selling the art prints individually, it makes sense to go for the best possible quality. But in my case, this is a 40-page booklet, so it needs to make an overall impression, but not each of the pages needs to be like this masterpiece. So it wasn't noticeable to me when I did compare the two, so much so that I printed, best on one side and then normal on the other, and it was, completely transparent in this particular case. But that's what I would recommend. And then if you go to paper handling, you'll see destination paper size. That should just be grayed out, but just make sure that it's the same paper size as the one that we set up in the booklet. And it should already be that, but I just like to double check. It does processing for a couple seconds, and then once it's processed all the pages, the printer should boot up after it gets the message from the AirPrint on a Mac.